Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Urban Waters, Urban Waters Restoring and Revitalizing Our Communities session. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah Babulis, Habitat Project Coordinator for Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. If you have any questions or concerns or anything during the session, please reach out via the chat box. And whether it's tech related or otherwise, someone will reach out to you to get you an answer. Please be aware that all our sessions are being recorded, and the chat threads will all be saved and available on Sked and YouTube and our website a few weeks after the summit. There will be 2 opportunities for questions during the session, depending on time. Each speaker may have a few minutes at the end of their presentation for questions. These questions will be selected via the Q&A box, so please enter your questions there during the presentations, and we'll answer them as time allows. Might not get to all of them. At the end of this session, though, there will be a 15-minute open Q&A session for all the speakers, and questions can be directed at any or all the presenters. So we encourage you to use the raise hand feature then, so we can hear your voices, and our tech team will ask you to unmute, but we'll also take questions from the Q&A box. Kurt Chang from PDE is here and will be moderating those questions. All right, thank you very much. I'm now going to throw it over to Emily Bombach to introduce herself and our first speaker.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Bombeck, Estuary Program Coordinator with the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, and thanks again for joining us on our Urban Waters Restoring and Revitalizing Our Community session. We have a fantastic group of speakers lined up. Our first speaker in this session is Bradley Dean from FEMA Risk Management Directorate, giving a talk titled Getting to Yes with Resilience Through Community Collaboration. So take it away, Bradley.
Here we go. Thanks, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see my screen now? Awesome.
Looks good.
So thanks. First, thanks for having me. I'm super excited about this. I actually grew up in South Jersey in Gloucester County, and growing up fishing with my grandfather on the Delaware Bay, and I worked at the Wetlands Institute in Stone Harbor growing up in high school. So the Delaware Bay and the whole estuary system in Jersey, Delaware, and that area is really important to why I do what I do now. So I think this is exciting, and thanks a lot. So I wanted to talk about reducing risk through mitigation and resilience projects can protect communities and save lives, but communities don't often know how to get to yes. Proactive and creative planning is really a necessity to identify projects that reduce risk, build resilience, and meet the needs of the whole community, and all of which is strengthened through partnerships. So today I'm going to talk about 2 new tools that we have developed to support community-driven decision-making for nature-based solutions and mitigation. So these are the Building Community Resilience with Nature-Based Solutions Guide, or the Nature-Based Solutions Guide for short, and the Guides to Expanding Mitigation series. So inherently, resilience must involve the whole community, and it's really time to expand our reach. Floodplain administrators, environmental scientists, and planners can always work together with other sectors to bring resilience to life and link hazard mitigation to everyday concerns. The value of these partnerships in reducing risk really cannot be overstated. I think the biggest thing we've learned over the past couple of years is resilience really doesn't have a sector. Everyone needs to be involved in reducing disaster suffering. And at FEMA, we're drawing the connections between partnerships and innovative solutions that benefit the whole community. So one innovative way communities can build resilience is through nature-based solutions. So my background is in a coastal ecologist, so I love discussing these types of things. And so we define nature-based solutions really as sustainable planning, design, environmental management, and engineering practices that weave natural features or processes into development to build more resilient communities. While our materials at FEMA use the term nature-based solutions, other organizations and agencies use related terms, such as EPA really uses green infrastructure. Some use natural infrastructure. The Army Corps uses engineering with nature. And as a best practice, we really tailor how we deliver this, or what terminology or nomenclature we use, based on what our target audience uses. So if you're talking to a bunch of planners and they use green infrastructure, there's no reason to continue to use nature-based solutions. I think that's one of the big lessons we've learned over the years. Planning and building cost-effective nature-based solutions definitely require a lot of collaboration. And so the nature-based solutions guide is designed to help communities identify and engage staff at the community level and provide resources to build resilience with nature-based solutions. So consider partners such as the local parks and recreation department, utility companies, and others. In addition to some of the entities listed here, non-governmental community partners like civic associations, watershed groups, and nonprofit organizations really have been key in should be part of the planning process. They may have capacity to customize and implement solutions that maybe the federal government or the community cannot. So anyone interested in reducing their community's risk from hazards can play a part in the development of nature-based solutions and other mitigation or resilience projects and strategies. I know a lot of NGOs have, in coastal environments, really have had volunteers come out and build rain gardens or design, help build living shorelines. And so it's a great way to get people involved. And when we think about collaborating with the whole community, we need to build connections with new partners by engaging people in sectors not currently involved in resilience. And for the Risk Management Directorate, that has been a huge priority of ours, expanding beyond what, I don't know if everyone can see me, I'm using air quotes here, of our traditional audience, and interacting with organizations that may not necessarily understand that resilience or hazard mitigation really is parallel to their core mission. And the Guides to Expanding Mitigation series includes some examples of unexpected partnerships where the whole community can benefit from, for instance, nature-based solutions. So in agricultural areas, collaborating on these solutions can address both mitigation needs and water quality concerns. So with EPA, they really focus on cross-selling the fact that their water quality solutions also can benefit water quantity. And we actually do the reverse. It's a great partnership we have with EPA. We tell people all the time, maybe your avenue of funding should be water quality, and your secondary benefit can be water quantity. Another one is working with transportation experts. So there's been a lot more partnerships associated with building nature-based solutions into transportation infrastructure. And so you can identify roadways that frequently wash out or flooded and create designs that preserve green space or wetlands adjacent to that right of way. Speaking to public health officials can help you brainstorm ways stormwater parks can meet other community health needs like physical activity, air quality, things of that nature. And above all, placing equity at the center of what we do and what nature-based solutions do is really critical. So the most at-risk populations, our communities, definitely experience, the greater losses, the disproportionate impacts. And so by prioritizing an inclusive planning process, we really can better ensure that, these nature-based solutions meet the needs of the whole community. So there are more examples in the other guides that are shown here, as well as some guides that are coming out on telecommunications and whole communities. And so this series really shares ideas about how to get conversations started with new partners, and they're super high level in a really good way. In plain language, very visual, and an excellent way to start the conversation. And so when we think about collaborating with the whole community, we do need to build those connections with new partners by engaging new sectors. So the series also includes some examples of the oh, I already hit that one. Sorry, I got stuck. So there's clearly a theme, right? I even just said it completely again. Nature-based solutions are cross-cutting for community goals, generally unlike what traditional gray infrastructure provides. So perhaps most obviously, nature-based solutions can help reduce the loss and life of property resulting from some of our nation's most common natural hazards. So flooding, storm surge, drought, landslides. So as future conditions amplify these hazards, nature-based solutions can help communities adapt and thrive. And so one of the biggest selling points that we have for nature-based solutions are the multiple benefits beyond just mitigating natural hazards. So short and long-term environmental, economic, and social advantages that improve a community's quality of life, make it more attractive to residents and businesses. Even more, co-benefits may include improved water quality, cleaner water supply, air quality, healthier wildlife habitats, increased property values, which results in the increase in the tax base, green jobs, recreation space. Like the list really goes on and on how these are beneficial. And so building a business case for nature-based solutions by summarizing their non-monetary benefits and potential cost savings is important. And so with nature-based solutions serving these multiple functions and goals, there are opportunities to boost investment through public-private partnership, development incentives, or other financing programs. And so the bottom line is that collaboration on nature-based solutions can help communities survive in the long term and really thrive day to day. So here's an example that brings all this together. So the World Garden Commons at Ravenous Park, which is shown here, was a pilot site for the Fargo project in North Dakota. And this project is an excellent example of how engaging a typically untapped sector can improve the outcomes of mitigation or resilience projects and help realize numerous co-benefits. So previously, this basin served an important stormwater function, but cut off communities and didn't have a clear positive impact on immigrant refugee populations and low to moderate income families. So what the Fargo project aimed to do was to turn these detention ponds, which are dry throughout most of the year, into valuable community common areas for events and to teach residents about their use. Fargo received seed money from the National Endowment of the Arts to do outreach for 6 months before beginning the redesign process. And so without the variety of creative outreach efforts led by artists, Fargo doubts that they could have accomplished the same turnout or variety of feedback. And so this project demonstrates how an undervalued water resource really can become an inviting public space that connects people to natural systems that are grounded in aesthetic understandings. And so communities that invest in nature-based nature-based approaches to reduce disaster risk, can definitely save money, lives, property in the long term, and improve quality of life. And so some of the key takeaways we just wanted to touch on was diverse partners really need to collaborate to build resilience with nature-based solutions. I'd be lying if I said that every outcome of nature-based solutions was positive. There are cases where gentrification has caused a negative impact because a nature-based solution has been incorporated. Like the New York City High Line's a great example. Like the incorporating the community you're trying to reach in the planning process is really critical because there are multi benefits of these, but we need to be cognizant of the different views and uses of it. Building the business case for nature-based solutions can really generate widespread interest among diverse organizations. I will say probably most importantly amongst the decision makers, right? Everybody wants to know what the business case is, what the return on investment is. So reduction of loss in life and property is one piece. And then there's obviously all of those multiple benefits that can provide and how you can integrate these types of things into your community planning. And finally is get creative from project planning to funding and implementation to expanding the participation of diverse sectors. It's really, really critical. I think we're getting to a point where incorporating arts and experiential learning into mitigation is becoming a really big thing. Incorporating murals. We saw the Fargo example. I'm not sure many people would have made the linkage of, detention ponds and community gathering areas and partnering with the National Endowment of the Arts to do it. We are seeing more and more these types of priorities align, and it's becoming even more beneficial to bring those non-traditional partners to the table. And so with that, I think I'm ready for questions. I know that was pretty quick, but I wanted to leave time for discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Brad. I'm going to turn it over to Kurt for Q&A. I think we might have had 1 or 2 questions come in.
Sure. So one just came in, Brad. Does FEMA offer grant funds for municipalities or nonprofit organizations to implement nature-based solutions, or would people reach out to someone like you for help on a project?
So this is a great question, because I'm going to drop this into the chat. But recently, the building resilient infrastructure and community. So I think most people have kind of heard about the BRIC program at this point. It's $500 million for pre-disaster mitigation opportunities. I think the proposal period, the submission period just ended, but that's a really great one that FEMA has. I would say that there are really great organizations, particularly NGOs, that thrive on taking federal dollars and working as like a pass-through organization to promote nature-based solutions. So the National Fish and Wildlife Federation is a great one, where they've done a lot of coastal resilience grants. Historically, FEMA has not seen a lot of nature-based solutions projects because sometimes the states don't know necessarily how to factor those into, or how to categorize those. And also there's been a lot of difficulty with the benefit cost analysis. But recently, FEMA did release the ecosystem services policy, which should make that a lot easier. And the BRIC program is really trying to prioritize nature-based solutions. So I recommend the BRIC program, and I can share that link momentarily. I recommend National Fish and Wildlife Federation, TNC. The list is very long, and I'd be happy to provide some follow-up on that.
All right, great. Thank you again, Brad. Our second talk in this session is from Nathan Boon with the William Penn Foundation, and Nathan's talk is titled Concentration Theory for the Urban Estuary: Can Targeted Conservation Impact Water Quality in Densely Developed Sub-Watershed? So the floor is yours, Nathan.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session. My name is Nate Boon. I'm a grant officer with the William Penn Foundation in Philadelphia. Pleased to be sharing some of our latest thinking on a topic that I think will be interesting for those of you who are involved in modeling and thinking about watershed estuary systems, those of you who are thinking about the urban estuary specifically, and how to achieve some of those values that Brad was just talking about in terms of delivering co-benefits for communities and addressing some priorities around equity and racial equity in particular. The William Penn Foundation embarked on this work as part of prioritizing our investment strategy. We're a grant-making entity, a family foundation whose funding priorities include the environment, with roughly $30 million, going out every year to focus on a number of different environmental priorities. One of our signature initiatives, which is focused on protection and restoration on the ground work in our targeted sub-watersheds category. One of our signature initiatives is the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, which I know the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary and many of you participating in this conference have some involvement with, or perhaps some knowledge of. And I'm going to say more about that specific initiative as a means of introducing some thinking that we're engaged in about how to replicate some of those strategies for picking geographic targets, how to replicate that for the urban estuary, for densely developed communities within the city of Philadelphia. So the premise here is really trying to replicate that strategy. And within the city of Philadelphia, we're really looking at units, at sub-watersheds, where we can implement and focus on green stormwater infrastructure. Again, that natural infrastructure category you just heard Brad talk about, which has so many co-benefits, and trying to pick places where the scale of funding we're able to mobilize as a private funder that our partners in the nonprofit and NGO community are able to bring to bear can be meaningful and have meaningful impact on water quality. The Delaware River Watershed Initiative is the selection process. That geographic prioritization process for that initiative is laid out very briefly here. It dates back to 2013 as the foundation embarked on a new strategy, and we were really thinking about how to use science, right? How to use science and have a science foundation for how our grant making was going to occur, how we would be investing, combined with a feasibility screen, these other additional values that would help us pick some places to work and really try and concentrate our impact. And you'll hear more on that concentration theory. The framework we used for this prioritization exercise was the watershed, a science-based framework, adhering to natural systems and how they function, dividing the Delaware River Basin from the estuary all the way up to the headwaters into its component sub-watersheds and assessing them for opportunities to have impact. Very much science-driven, but also very much reflective of specific values that the William Penn Foundation and our leadership were prioritizing. And it's important, over the course of these last couple of days, we've heard about, values, heard about science, in the appeal to have a strict and science-based approach. And I want to, I've taken, the luxury of going on day 2 to try and integrate some of this, some points about values and how values interweave into our work that we try and have based on science. The two go together. We can't be making decisions in isolation of our values, just strictly based on science. So, just to illustrate that, a number of environmental values are represented here, all certainly legitimate, all based on credible science. And the way the William Penn Foundation approached that was really looking at this clean surface water, and that was a reflection of our values, and in particular our values around how land and water intersect. This quote here from Luna Leopold, Aldo Leopold's son, that I love just so much, that reads, "The health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land." And I think that really reflects the ethos and values that the foundation was bringing to this work along with our grantee community. That land-water connection, had us look at those sub-watershed units you saw on the previous slide, assess the land cover and how land cover was split up across those geographies to identify and sort out some sub-watershed systems that recommended themselves for conservation investment, for restoration, for protection of the natural landscape, all in service, again, of geographic prioritization. So we had this science-based focus area analysis. But of course, we needed a feasibility screen as well. It's not just where the science tells us to work, it's where we have organizations capable of doing the work with the capacity to source good projects. It's where we have landscape identity, places that resonate, with decision makers, with funders, with others. Another other criteria here that really helped us take that science foundation, layer in all these additional values, additional social drivers to prioritize geographies for on-the-ground investment. That still left us with having challenges of scale and impact. Those clusters, those 8 geographies that we prioritized from across the larger watershed geography, helped us focus in considerably, helped us to begin to concentrate and define this concentration theory, where we're starting with the huge scale of the basin on 9 million acres, looking at the clusters, these 8 geographies across the basin that really begin to hone in, that they themselves are based on these watershed units, HUC 12s, and USGS nomenclature for their hydrography data set. And then, a measure of humility still required there as we looked at these HUC 12s and compared to the scale of a typical project site, and just really behooved us to take concentration theory one that additional step further. Really, how do we focus in even further than that HUC 12 scale of say 40 square miles to really get down to the catchment level, and using the NHD plus data from USGS to really refine that scale even further and hone in. So that was, DRWI, Delaware River Watershed Initiative, recap very briefly. And so now I felt that that's important context for how we're trying to replicate concentration theory for the city of Philadelphia in the context of the city's Green City Clean Waters plan for reducing its combined sewer overflows. Really a vision that has nature-based solutions, green stormwater infrastructure at the center, and how the William Penn Foundation, as a private funder with partners in the nonprofit and non-governmental communities, can be part of that. So Green City Clean Waters, it's primarily a program that's owned by the city, owned by the Philadelphia Water Department. They have regulatory benchmarks they have to hit in terms of how projects are being invested, are being built and constructed. And those projects, as you can see, the completed projects are spread all across the city and all across the combined sewer overflow area. But as has been, as we have shared it in the past, this is an excerpt from a presentation I provided at the previous Science of the Estuary Summit in 2019. The concentration theory is really trying to help the foundation and our partners understand how we can have this measurable impact. And just as a quick thought exercise, I don't have too much time for this, but to think about spending the most investment, the greatest investment we might possibly imagine mobilizing to preserve our watershed, if spread randomly or evenly across the basin, is only enough to stabilize our watershed in a relatively impaired status, a non-supporting status using the impervious cover model. But if we concentrate that investment, if we focus on areas where we can get to thresholds that are important for our success, like this 25, limiting sub-watershed to 25% impervious, we can stabilize and protect more of the basin at a higher condition. And that's that concentration that we're really trying to get to within the city of Philadelphia as well. You'll see, in this image, the geographies for preservation are not in the, they're in the rural parts of our landscape. And it feels essential that we also, deliver science-based approaches for our work in the urban parts of the watershed as well. So in Philadelphia, we had to acknowledge that Philadelphia's hydrology is a little bit different. Our streamlines, our blue lines, are often buried in pipes, buried in sewers, the way the combined sewer overflow system was built out. And this means that our sub-watersheds, or the analog to our sub-watersheds, are really these sewer sheds, these areas of the land that drain to a specific sewer outfall. They get collected in these, in these trunk lines, these sewer lines, and drain to a specific outfall. And with that focus, it's still that same focus, that same ethos on delivering impact to downstream receiving waters, on trying to evaluate which of these landscapes, which of these sewer sheds are close to a tipping point. Where might the scale of investment we can mobilize be meaningful and able to have impact? We looked at this analogous kind of assessment where pour points became equated with combined sewer overflow outfalls, sub-watersheds became sewer sheds. And with that premise, we wanted to evaluate the different sewer sheds, different potential geographies for this type of approach. Where might this type of approach be suitable? And so we used a regression model for this purposes, knowing that the city and others have used SWIM and other more finely resolved and more sophisticated modeling processes for a number of their decisions. For the high level we were at, a regression model was suitable. It required some data processing for the regression analysis. We again, going in there with the hypothesis that really what we're trying to understand, given our prioritization of nature-based solutions and green stormwater infrastructure, we really wanted to understand combined sewer overflow as a negative function of green space. Green space goes up, CSO goes down, and as a positive function of imperviousness. Imperviousness goes up, CSO goes up. And testing that hypothesis using some regression-based techniques. There was some data processing required. In some instances, the underground sewer infrastructure, these lines in reds, conforms nicely to how we typically think about a watershed or drainage area. This is Mill Creek, literally a buried creek in West Philadelphia, whose outfall reflects the size of the geography there, as you can see in that picture. In other areas, we see that the trunk lines, the sewer lines are interconnected. landscapes aren't going to behave in a kind of traditional or typical fashion. So it required some data processing there. Again, apologize, 15 minutes, I think I was a little overambitious, so I'll move through these plots quickly. But in brief, we looked at, did some regression analysis for multiple indicators of interest, looked at the distribution of areas for the different sizes of these sewer sheds. Certainly area is the dominant driver of combined sewer overflow volume, as one might expect. Use this to develop a model that performs pretty well, certainly for our purposes. We see that the hypothesis bears out the relationship is as expected: more green space, less CSO, more imperviousness, more area, increased CSO. And sensitivity analysis also shows us that we can expect that the level of investment required is within our grasp. The level of investment required to have impact is within our grasp.
2 minutes.
So this
2 minutes.
So this approach I think can be useful for us. And the essential next steps for us are to build in and more build in a greater emphasis for this equity value, right? We have the land and water intersection with combined sewer overflow discharges to water, and the role of nature-based, right? Like practices, land-based practices that have this surface expression of vegetation that provides all number and manner of co-benefits. The priority, it's not just what the science says, it's not just where the model tells us it makes sense to work. The model, as you might expect, if you want to have a big impact with a fixed amount of resources, choose a small problem. So small sewer sheds, light up in this analysis and perform well. But again, there's much more than just the science, of how watersheds function at stake here. We have to also think about neighborhood identity the same way we thought about landscape identity. We have to think about community and institutional capacity. Where is there partners who can help us in this work? Other things that might catalyze investment, like major city capital investments through Rebuild or the Transportation Improvement Program. And then certainly equity. Equity and co-benefits is so important. So I know I'm at time here, but I just would spend another 30 seconds on this point to emphasize that the co-benefits of nature-based infrastructure, I think, are increasingly well understood by this community, and I'm hearing them emphasized across a number of different presentations. But the need, right, the relative need across different communities is not equal and is not, I think, as well understood as it needs to be. We need to think about the different co-benefits of these practices in addition to their water quality benefits. And also in thinking about prioritizations, what communities and the history of those communities says about where an investment is warranted, particular when we think about the role that systemic unjust practices like redlining, have led to inequities, and how heat stress and a lack of tree canopy, lack of access to green space are being experienced by communities. And that will be the next step for this project, working with partners at Temple University, Drexel, and the Academy of Natural Sciences. So with that, I thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Nathan. I think for the sake of time, we are going to jump right into the next talk, but if folks have questions, there will be some time for open Q&A at the end of this session. So our third presentation today will be from Ellen Kohler with the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center. And Ellen's presentation is titled Funding Water Infrastructure in the Delaware River Basin. Welcome, Ellen.
Thanks very much, Emily. I am actually going to focus specifically on the lower Lehigh River watershed within the Delaware. This is a project that we are working on in partnership with the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania with funding support from the William Penn Foundation. So thank you, Nate. Just for those of you who don't know, the Environmental Finance Center is one of 10 university-based centers, each serving an EPA region. Our center serves EPA Region 3, which includes Pennsylvania. Our research question for this project focused on how accessible are funding resources in the state of Pennsylvania to communities outside the major urban areas, meaning Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, to address their infrastructure needs across all three water sectors: drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. And by accessible, what we mean is, can the community get the funds to hit the ground to address the needs that they have right now? We selected 8 communities in the lower Lehigh. They're varying sizes, but they have public water utilities or authorities. They are MS4 permittees, and they have a shared interest in the Lehigh River. So this is the area that we are talking about. And here, if you can see my cursor, I hope, this is the Lehigh. It makes a right-hand turn at Allentown and heads out here to the Delaware. And our area of focus, our study area, is right here above the bend. Our research methodology included looking at online resources from local and regional sources, also data compiled and analyzed by Dr. Laura Patterson at Duke University. We developed a short survey and deployed it to water managers, and we are completing follow-up interviews based on that survey. We also reviewed funding information from Penvest, the Commonwealth Financing Authority, and the U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development Program. These are 3 common sources of funding for water infrastructure, not the only sources. But we wanted to look at those projects that were funded between 2009 and the present. And the reason 2009 is important is, as you may recall, that was the year that the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was passed, and a big flush of stimulus funding came to water infrastructure. And since there's a lot of discussion about that right now, we wanted to see if we could learn from past experience with federal stimulus dollars. Moving to a map that gives us a little bit more information about the area. I do want to note this is a slightly old existing land use map, but here's our study area. And please note these light pink areas are warehousing. This is a region where there is a regional airport in Allentown, and it is being used by FedEx, UPS, and Amazon as a distribution center. So this is a growing land use in this area. And some other maps to give us a little sense of the study area around water quality. This is a map of designated uses. This is what our water quality should be. The blue and green are cold water fisheries. The main stem of the Lehigh here is trout stocking. And as it turns the quarter, it goes into warm water fisheries. And this is a map of what is actually happening, the status of water quality in this area. The light blue are attaining waters, but everything else is not attaining. That means that they're polluted from one source or another. In our study area, the major problem is urban runoff. Above, coming in on the main stem, we have some challenges with abandoned mine drainage, and also here from some agricultural runoff. To get a sense of the fiscal capacity of these communities, we looked at some parameters that'll help us understand potential and ability to pay. So for potential, we look at population and households. This is just a beginning point to get a sense of how many, frankly, ratepayers are there out there, but this does not include, of course, business and commercial entities. The other elements help us understand ability to pay, and just, sort of quickly, takeaways here show that, for example, Allentown City may have great potential because there are a lot of folks. It has very low ability. We've got a very low medium household income, not a great college graduation rate, and pretty high poverty rates, as opposed to South Whitehall, which has, at least in this study area, a moderate number of people, so moderate level potential, but high ability based on its median household income, college graduation rate, and low poverty rates. To turn to the systems, the public drinking water systems, there are 4 of them basically in the region. Catasauqua Borough operates one. The Lehigh County Authority has 2 elements to its drinking water system: Northampton Borough Municipal Authority and the Whitehall Township Authority. The 2 smaller ones use wells for their source of water, but all 3 of the large and medium-sized one have the Lehigh River as a source for drinking water. Turning to wastewater, We have 3 treatment plants, one at Catasauqua, one run by Lehigh County Authority at Kleins Island, and one at Northampton Borough Sewer Department. The Copley-Whitehall Sewer Authority is only managing the collection system. So it manages the pipes and then sends all of the wastewater to Lehigh County Authority for treatment at Kleins Island. We do not have any stormwater authorities in this region. Allentown does have a stormwater utility. Here, I'm going to go through a couple of maps that show you what these systems look like, what their footprints are. So this is the Lehigh County Authority for drinking water. It is consolidating with what used to be the South Whitehall drinking water system. So this will all be managed by the Lehigh County Authority. This light blue is the Whitehall drinking water system. This teal is the Northampton Borough Municipal Authority. This is Northampton Borough, but it's a drinking water authority. It reaches out all over here. And this is Catasauqua. Turning to our wastewater systems, here is the Lehigh County Authority system, Northampton Borough, and Catasauqua. I also want to note that the tan in this map shows the urbanized area. That means the area that is part of the MS4 permit for these communities. This is just a close-up map of this Kleins Island treatment facility, and shows you that all of these municipalities to the west of the main stem of the Lehigh here are all sending their wastewater to this treatment plant for treatment, and then the outfall is into the Lehigh River. So that these communities, South Whitehall, Whitehall, and Copley, typical of some of these, a lot of communities, they are managing the collection system. So they do bear the cost of maintaining those pipes in their system individually as a municipality. Ratepayers in their communities are paying their rates to Lehigh County Authority to treat the wastewater, but they still are responsible, the municipalities are still responsible for that collection system and maintaining it. Just a little bit of snapshot information from some of the fiscal resources that we were able to look at. So Catasauqua Borough, remember, is managing wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater. They're currently showing a deficit in their budget. They've got some pretty big maintenance issues they've got to take care of. They need to replace a backup generator. And they are currently, because of COVID, experiencing a 20% rate of non-payment. Their usual rate of non-payment is 2%. And this budget is around $2.5 million. So these are pretty big chunks of change for them. Allentown, as I mentioned, does have a stormwater utility. That fee was adopted for that utility, was adopted in 2018, based on a backlog of identified projects of $60 million. Northampton Borough's recent sewer budget has $1.5 million in expenses and 1.6 in revenue. Unfortunately, this budget doesn't tell us too much about need. So we got to be able to look further than the budget information to truly understand what's going on. And I included a little bit of information here from Whitehall because it shows that stormwater expenses are increasing and probably likely to increase for all of these communities in the future as they're managing stormwater and from larger storm events. So looking at our funding sources, here's a snapshot of PennVest funding. Over here on the left, we have where all the funding comes from for PennVest. I want to note here that this is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act from 2009. And of course, a big chunk of change comes from federal dollars through the Clean Water Act for PennVest funding. Also, this shows on the right how that money gets spent for drinking water projects, for stormwater project, and in this case, that means gray stormwater, so stormwater pipes and inlets, and sewer projects, and then 9-point source projects. So that would be where we would see any of the green stormwater infrastructure projects that a community might be pursuing. So, generally the stormwater and non-point source are smaller. We expect this non-point source chunk, as you see here for the last year, we expect that to be increasing. So in the past, in the time period that we were looking at, we had 4 projects that were funded by PennVest in this area, a couple of pretty large ones and 2 sort of medium-sized ones. For stormwater, again, this is gray stormwater, as you can see for storm sewers and inlets. I want to note here that this is North Catasauqua Borough. They are planning to repay using general funds. we got drinking water projects from Lehigh County, and then this wastewater project for Copley Whitehall. And I want to note that they expected to pay this loan back. These are all loan projects, or all loan funding, and they were going to pay it back by increasing their rates by 12%. That's a pretty big hike. Turning to the Commonwealth Finance Authority, there are 3 different programs that help support water infrastructure. They include the H2O PA Water and Sewer Program, the PA Small Water and Sewer Program, and the Act 13 program. These are all grant programs. So difference in funding, PennVest has been, those were all loans, these are all grants. As you can see, we have 11 projects here, so more projects, a larger variety of projects, but smaller amounts for the most part. All we have, this one for Allentown was rather large, but our total is much smaller, 2.7 million, basically 13% of what we saw for the PennVest projects. We didn't have any USDA rural development projects for this time period for these communities, but we do have one in the works at the moment. So turning to conclusions based on all this information, what we've learned, what we see, at least in these communities, and we are repeating this same analysis for a set of communities in the Chesapeake and also for a set of communities in the Ohio with funding from some other foundations. But what we're learning is that not surprisingly, the grant funding from the Commonwealth Finance Authority provides a really important resource. It's more accessible and it fills an important gap. And we need more of it, frankly. The PennVest funding is important. It's less accessible because it is loan funding. And that means that communities have to lock up some revenue streams to pay back those loans, but it's really important funding for these larger projects. We are seeing few green stormwater infrastructure projects funded to date, so we got to change that. And that means helping communities target these resources, but also helping those funders understand the value of green stormwater infrastructure projects. Both of these programs, the CFA and PennVest funding programs, do not provide support for planning, and you cannot get to the door unless you have a project that is already planned. This is a really big funding gap.
2 minutes, Ellen, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We also know that we have a huge backlog in maintenance in all of these communities in terms of their stormwater gray infrastructure, frankly. And for all of these communities, we are going to be looking at solutions that are both gray and green because they already have substantial gray infrastructures in place for drinking water, wastewater, and frankly, stormwater too. So these maintenance challenges are really important to be addressing as well. I am concerned about how COVID is going to impact these communities. The 20% non-payment rate that we saw in Catasauqua is significant. Those systems are mostly serving residential customers, and I'm concerned that this is going to hamper revenue streams for these smaller municipal authorities and water managers. So in general, we need more accessible funding for smaller and medium-sized municipalities, particularly for planning and for green stormwater infrastructure. We need to be considering affordability of loan funding. It's not feasible to just simply increase rates, which is what you would normally do, because you'd have to increase the revenue stream into the community to be able to access more loan funding. And that's just not realistic for a lot of communities, particularly the Allentowns. So I think we need to start thinking about how we structure some of our funding and consider more of a cost share kind of structure, particularly around stormwater. So, we've got grant funding, we've got loan funding. We need something in the middle that's more of a cost share where the communities got some skin in the game and some important skin in the game, but that also has a more grant-like element to it as well. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ellen. And again, a huge thank you to our 3 speakers in this water session today. It does look like we have a few minutes for some open Q&A for any questions for Ellen, as well as any questions for Brad and Nathan.
So I got a question for Brad if anybody else does.
Yes,
I
everyone
know
Right
gets
on.
you're
ask
surprised
FEMA
to hear that.
questions.
So I am wondering if you can share with us any projects that have been funded through BRIC funding that are natural solution-based projects.
I wish I could, but I believe the period for submission just closed, and so that is one of
Yeah.
that's in the mitigation directorate, which is like in our group, in our section. I'm not going to go into the very complex FEMA art, construct, but I believe we should know. I believe, and no one hold me to this, I believe over the next couple months that approval period will be happening. And so I believe there is an effort to evaluate and understand which projects, because they have included nature-based solutions or were either included them as a piece of the submission or the piece of the project, or are completely devoted to nature-based solutions.
Okay.
That's going to be part of the analysis because they really are trying to promote it. There are some difficulties in the way I'll just leave it at that. But they are doing their best to figure out any way they can promote it because, non-structural type of solutions are becoming something that's really a big priority for the agency and from our stakeholders. So I wish I had an answer for you.
Okay.
Hopefully, check in with me in a couple months and I can connect you with the person that might have that answer.
All right, I will.
All right, we have a question. Ellen, are there any next steps for the financing study? Parentheses, like presenting your findings to funders to rethink their funding programs.
Right. Yeah. So first, we're going to finish our analysis in, we're looking at Lancaster County in the Chesapeake, and then in the Sawmill Run watershed, which is near Pittsburgh. So that's in the Ohio River Valley. So we want to complete that so that so that the recommendations that we're making have, at least are looking at landscapes across the 3 major watersheds in Pennsylvania. But yes, the plan is to share this information back with Penvest and with the Commonwealth Financing Authority folks and rural development folks too. And yes, with our funders to see if we can come up with some strategies to pilot maybe some different ways of supporting and catalyzing, frankly, the kind of funding that these communities need. I mean, as Nathan pointed out in his presentation, that, no foundation is in a position to step in and fill a role to address all of these kinds of challenges. And frankly, neither is the federal government or state government. So what we got to figure out is what are the ways to catalyze and integrate across challenges, so that's why I'm very interested in how we can integrate in terms of hazard mitigation planning in some of these communities, to find efficient and effective ways to get funding to hit the ground to resolve a group of problems as opposed to one problem at a time. So we hope to have the entire analysis done by the end of May and be able to share that information back. I am hopeful that there will already be stimulus funding in the works by then, but we'll see.
I don't see any other questions, but we have some time. So if you have any, please raise your hand or put them in the Q&A box. If not, we'll end early, folks. Maybe you all want that.
It's a nice day outside. Everybody wants to go for a walk. I don't blame you.
Well, I'll plug that now then, but you have at 3:15, you should hop over to our last featured speaker, Dr. Kelsey Leonard will be speaking at 3:15. So I encourage you all to go there and then maybe go for a walk.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, thanks for having us.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just dropped my email into the chat. Ellen, please feel free to email me and I can connect you with the BRIC program. I promise you were not the only person asking that question.
Yeah, I know.
We
want as many examples as we can to share with folks. So thanks.
Yeah. Someone asked a question. I guess I'll just add this. I think DOTs are probably the biggest untapped resource in integrating nature-based solutions right now. There are requirements about disclosure for assets that have been impacted from natural hazards, and they have so much there's so much right-of-way available that selling nature-based solutions as a part of the infrastructure solution really extends the life of their infrastructure. And so
Right.
I just wanted to add that because someone asked, and I think that beyond just I know Federal Highway Administration has techniques for integrating green infrastructure into coastal resilience or coastal, highway. So there's really, really great opportunities there as well. And I was just informed that June is the timeline for Brick Awards.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Brad. I mean, I do think that looking to whether it's state or local transportation entities, it's really important. They also have MS4 permits, many of them, so that they have frankly, a regulatory driver in place as well. And so being able to find solutions that help them maintain their roads better and address, potential hazards as well as meeting a permit requirement can be really important for them. I would also note that, like, for example, in Pennsylvania, most of the roads in a township are managed by the township. And so to the extent that we can try to get state and local road managers together to work on, best practices, for example, I think that would be really great. And also Pennsylvania, at least in some regions, has, I think they're called transportation management agencies or associations. And so they're groupings of municipalities that are figuring out how to manage transportation, or address transportation challenges together. And those might be good entities to look to for aggregating projects or at least information dissemination. So I think that might be a really important organizational structure that we haven't tapped into enough for water quality purposes.
Yeah, I wish I could remember what the bill was, but there is some sort of infrastructure bill that resilient transportation, and then the dollar value was huge going to the state DOTs. It's gonna drive me crazy. I'll see if I can find it, but I just think it's there's so much untapped potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did have somebody put a link in the chat for PennDOT's LTAP. I would like to say I know what LTAP stands for, but as the point of contact, so maybe local town. I'm not sure what LTAP. If you could put what that is in the chat, that'd be awesome.
And I'll offer a plug too. As we think about how to make the case and best present these solutions, these natural infrastructure solutions to these other funding sources. Being able to demonstrate their success at a meaningful but attainable scale, I think can be a motivator, which is part of why we're excited about working with our partners on this concentrated approach. You have to show that it works, I think, to effectively capture funds from whether it's a resiliency, damage reduction, or a Clean Water Act motivated funding stream.
All right, we got pretty much to the end there, guys. So good. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. I'm just going to do 2 more plugs that I've been doing. Please check out our sponsorship page on this guide. We could not do all of this without our wonderful sponsors, so please go check them out. And also our posters and pre-recorded presentations. We have our final poster session tomorrow morning. You can check those out in advance. It's really helpful to all our presenters. And again, I hope you join us. We got 15 minutes. We'll have our final featured speaker of the summit, Dr. Kelsey Leonard. Hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody.